Making the opening statement for the defense.
I will, Your Honor.
Okay, thank you. Go right ahead, Mr. Regas.
9 days. The investigation into that precious girl's life lasted 9 days. On July 4th of 2020, her precious life was taken. And on July 13th, Officer Shepard said he was sure he had his person. He said he was 99.99% sure. 9 days later. And when you rush to justice by rushing to Julian, you inevitably land somewhere far different. And when you rush to justice by rushing to Julian, sometimes you just find yourself sitting in a seat charged with a crime you did not commit. And make no mistake about it, the evidence will prove that he did not commit this crime. And we are going to prove it. The math, the mother, and the man behind the wheel all agree, or at least they did, that Julian didn't do it. The math, the mother, and the man behind the wheel, they all said it, or at least they did, that he did not do it. We're going to start with the math. The state is saying that Julian pulled the trigger that killed that precious girl. They're going to say that she sat in the back seat in the middle of that car as it drove through the barricade. They are going to say that Julian was standing by the driver's side door as the car drove by. They are going to say that he fired into that car. And you are going to see video, and they are going to point to a person they are going to say was Julian. Well, what the math will say is that if Julian is the person they say he is, he didn't cause that girl's death. She was, and there'll be no dispute about this, a beautiful, beautiful 8-year-old girl. And that did not deserve to happen to her. But more than one thing can be true at the same time. What happened to her as she sat in that car seat should not have happened. And what is happening to him as he sits in that seat should not be happening. What the math will tell you is that if that person is him, he could not have caused that girl's death. Because if he is firing, as the evidence will show, and they'll have a medical examiner to testify about the fact, if he's standing and firing at the driver's side door, their medical examiner is going to tell you that the bullet entered that beautiful young girl from right to left, from low to high, from back to front. What that medical examiner will tell you is that the person who fired that shot, that trajectory is consistent with a person being on the right side of the car or near the back right side of the car to create a low to high, back to front, right to left trajectory. The evidence is going to show that a person standing by the driver's side door could not create that. But beyond the math, on that night, as they rushed to the hospital, and that beautiful girl's mother was in that hospital, and she was talking to officers. She told those officers, "Help me, help me, help me." They said, "How can we help you?" She said, "I saw the person who killed my baby. He was wearing black mask, black vest, dressed like y'all, all black with a long gun." Later, as she was in the hospital, she told officers again, "I saw the person who killed my girl. He was wearing black mask, black vest, dressed like y'all, carrying a long gun." You are going to see pictures of a person wearing all black, carrying a long gun, kneeling and firing upward. You are going to see that picture. You rush to justice by rushing to Julian. Sometimes you don't bother looking at the evidence along the path, because, as the evidence will show, the mother, and even the man behind the wheel say they didn't do it, or at least they did. In addition, they talked to that young woman the next day, the next couple of days at her home, and she repeated it. She repeated it. She repeated it. "I saw the man, black, dressed like y'all, bounty hunter, black vest, long gun." That's what she said the night of. She said the day after. She said the day after. And so did the man behind the wheel. They talked to him, and he said, "I saw the people who fired into that car. They were wearing black. They were dressed like bounty hunters. And they had long guns." That is what he told them. That is what he told them. But not only did he tell them that, he gave Officer Shepard pictures. He gave Officer Shepard a picture of people in some crew. And he said, "These are the two people." He talked about one guy being darker with a beard and another guy being short with dreadlocks. Those are the two people who shot into that car. Dressed in black, dressed like bounty hunters. He said the same thing that young woman said. But when you rush to justice, now rushing to Julian, you ignore. You ignore evidence along the way. July of 2020, that was a different time. People were home. That was in the height of COVID. And as the state indicated, that was what the police called an autonomous zone. And what the evidence will show, that will be a very generous description, for they just gave it up and said, y'all good over there. They provided no protection. They provided no security. They provided no peace. They allowed that area to police itself. They call it an autonomous zone, but again, that's very generous. They abandoned their responsibility. They abandoned their duty. It was July 4th. It was Independence Day, as the state said. But the evidence will show it was more than Independence Day. The evidence will show it was almost Independence Month. They were independent of law enforcement. They were on their own, not by choice, but because they were left no choice. That came at a time you had George Floyd in Minnesota, and witnesses will talk about this. You had George Floyd in Minnesota. You had Ahmaud Arbery down in Brunswick. And you had Rayshard Brooks right there at Wendy's in June. And when that happened, when all those things happened, people congregated at the scene of the Rayshard Brooks shooting. They congregated at that Wendy's for one night, for 1 week, for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks. They stayed, many of them stayed overnight. And in that autonomous zone, as they call it, it wasn't about gangs taking over, and the witnesses will tell you it had zero to do with gangs. In fact, as it was Independence Month, what you had in that community was, in their eyes at least, and they'll tell you, the community felt like it was winning. And not just winning, it was winning finally. They saw George Floyd. They saw Ahmaud Arbery. They saw Rayshard Brooks. And in that area, they had tents. They had grills. The community was feeding itself. You even had people who planted a garden. They were trying to provide haircuts for kids. They even had a porta potty they had there by the Wendy's, because it was Independence Day, but it was Independence Month. Not by choice, but because they were left no choice. And as they took care of themselves and stayed there and tried to, as they'll say, have their voices heard for once, be seen, be seen, they started hearing the rumblings, they started hearing the rumors of outsiders coming in, of the Klan coming in, various other things, the rumors that they'll tell you they heard. They're not going to show you any evidence of any defendant bringing in a barricade. The barricade was left by the city, because it was Independence Day, but it was Independence Month, because law enforcement said, nah, y'all good over there. So they brought barricades. And as the witnesses will tell you, under the influence of all of, was was happening in June of 2020 of the George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and the Rayshard Brooks. Also, they were cognizant, they knew of, they were aware of, and they were frightened about Heather Heyer, a woman protesting in West Virginia, Charlottesville, Virginia, where a car rammed the protesters. Because on this scene, on this night, as it had been the case for previous month almost, you had kids playing in the street, you had people cooking out, kids doing cartwheels, and families cooking and sharing food. This area is about 50 yards. It's less than a football field, 50 to 100 yards from beginning to end of that barricade. And that was the area. You'll see the video. Because it was Independence Day. That was the area where they wanted to keep their piece of America safe. The witnesses will tell you it was not about harming anybody. It was about healing everybody and protecting the community. So what you'll see is, you'll see that car go barreling past the barricade. You'll see that car hit somebody as it tries to jump out of the way. And you'll see somebody who was hit raise up and start firing. And you'll see that car keep going. And then you'll see somebody at that second barricade kneel in fire. All they wanted to do was keep that area safe. Because when that car came by, nobody at that barricade knew who was in it. They didn't know that that beautiful young girl was sitting in the back seat. All they knew, and they'll tell you, was that car come barreling past. And they knew there were kids in the street and people in the street and the community. They had to keep safe because it was Independence Day. As the evidence will show, 9 days into what should have been a thorough investigation, Officer Shepard said that he was 99.99% sure that Julian Conley fired those shots into that car. But you will see, as you've heard, that Julian Conley had on what they have called, and what the evidence will show, and what the picture will show, a distinctive red shirt. Julian Conley had on a distinctive red shirt. But when you rush to justice by rushing to Julian, you ignore the fact, as the evidence will show, that the mother, and the man behind the wheel all said something different. Because what the mother said was all black, dressed like a cop. What the man behind the wheel said was all black, dressed like a bounty hunter. What the man behind the wheel showed pictures of were people in all black, dressed like a bounty hunter. But he had on distinctive red. But what happened? The evidence will show that they got his picture. They got his picture when he went to that MARTA bus. Didn't threaten anybody, but they got his picture right there on the camera provided by the MARTA bus. In his red distinctive shirt, not black. And evidence will show they put that picture on TV. And evidence will show that when they put that picture on the TV, that man said, I want to go clear my name. And he called a lawyer. I am not responsible for him calling himself the fly lawyer, but he called a lawyer. He wasn't the fly lawyer. He called a lawyer who was a friend of his mom. He called a lawyer that he knew was in law enforcement with his mom when they worked at Clark University Police. So that was the person they called, Jackie Patterson. Jackie, can you help my son? And that man, to clear his name, I'm wearing red because at this point the evidence will show flyers had already gone out. Black, dressed like a bounty hunter, but he saw his picture on the screen and said, let me go turn myself in. Let me clear my name. And when he did that, he rushed to justice by rushing to Julian. He disregarded a lot of facts along the way. He turned himself in, thinking he would clear his name. When Officer Shepard made that statement 9 days later about being 99.99% sure, that was before he'd even requested to view the results of the autopsy. Because, again, when you rush to justice, you don't have to wait for details. Before he got the results, before he'd seen the results of the medical examiner, he already made up his mind. I'm so happy you're here. At some point, the state is going to tell you that you get to use your common sense and don't check it at the door. I'm so glad you're here. Because the common sense will tell you that when you are 99.9% sure, what you looking for after that? So when he made that statement about being 99.9% sure and saying that Julian was standing by that driver's side door firing into the car, he didn't know at that point that the bullet entered from right to left, low to high, back to front. They get to the hospital that night. It's about 10 o'clock or so at Atlanta Medical Center. And while that mother is in the hospital with their daughter, the man behind the wheel is outside in the parking lot. And he's telling them from outside in that parking lot, I'm going to have a lawyer tomorrow. His exact words were something along the lines of, I'm going to have a top flight lawyer tomorrow, zero money down. We're talking hours from the time that beautiful girl was shot. So glad you're here. So glad you're here. Because although, as the evidence will show, that I guess they call him Detective Shepard, concluded his investigation in 9 days, it's not over. it's not over. Because he doesn't get the last word. He doesn't get to say that you're 99.9% sure. You will get to examine all the evidence. You'll get to hear all of the witnesses. You'll get to do something they didn't do. When you rush to justice by rushing to Julian, you ignore the fact that the mother, and the man behind the wheel all agree that he didn't do it. You'll get to finish the investigation. You'll get to find him not guilty of all those charges, and I thank you for your attention.
Thanks, everyone. Do you need a break before we start with our first witness? You need a restroom break? Okay, go ahead and step out.